Good day. I am going to talk about the contribution of ESD to quality of education. I will begin by referring to this cartoon here, which I borrowed from the internet. It is an example of the 21st century challenges, and in this case, it is mass migration. On the left-hand side, I have got an example of where the migrants are coming from, in this case, Africa. And on the right-hand side, there is the recipient. In this case, it is Western Europe. I will leave the interpretation to yourselves. What I would like to concentrate on is a situation where we either take this as a threat or an opportunity. And I would like to argue that the 21st century challenge is an opportunity for quality education. This diagram illustrates an expanding middle class. The world's middle class will expand to 5 billion by 2030. Asia Pacific alone will increase by 571%. This is Asia Pacific mainly because of India and China. This is Europe. You've got North America here. This is Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and North Africa, Central and South America. I am using this diagram because I would like to ask this question that we find at the bottom here. How do we reconcile this massive middle class expansion with a healthy planet? The challenge is an expanding middle class increases the 21st century global dysfunction. The emerging middle class, especially in developing countries, will consume more goods and services. They will pollute more and degrade more. There will be more plastic bags from their shopping. There will be more carbon dioxide emissions from their cars. There will be an increase in degraded land from the food that they waste. There will be a reduction in water tables from irrigation needed to produce animal food grain for their meat. And there will be increased coral reef destruction from sunscreens which they use when they are on vacation. ESD is an educational response to this global dysfunction. And if ESD is able to respond to this global dysfunction, then it is relevant education. And if it is relevant education, I can argue that ESD is quality education. Alvin Toffler said, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." If I can concentrate on unlearning and relearning, we find ourselves in the 21st century, which is unsustainable, not because we want to be unsustainable, but because society has taught us to be unsustainable. Society is already on an unsustainable mode. So what we need to do is to unlearn those unsustainable practices that society has taught us. And at the same time, we have to relearn those sustainable practices that we have abandoned or rejected because we think they are old-fashioned or they have become archaic. What ESD does is it promises learning, unlearning, and relearning for a sustainable future. What can ESD promise? I will use a quote from Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." The same thinking we used when we created these problems is what I can call business as usual. In education, we cannot only rely on business as usual, because if we do so, we cannot solve the same problem because it uses the same thinking which we used when we created this problem. What we need is business as unusual. If this happens, then ESD is educating for a new way of thinking and a new way of doing. And the result is education for social transformation. When we get education for social transformation, I can argue it is quality education. This cartoon shows two friends who are talking about a dog. One friend says, "I taught Stripe how to whistle." Stripe is the dog. And then the friend answers and says, "I don't hear him whistle." And then the first friend answers him again and says, "I said I taught him. I didn't say he learnt it." What the cartoon shows is that there is a disconnect between teaching and learning. What ESD does is that it connects teaching with learning. And when this happens, ESD becomes educating for a new way of thinking. If we are educating for a new way of thinking, then I can say ESD is quality education. This diagram here shows us an example of business as usual. What we see here is information transfer from the teacher to the learner. Also, when we put technology in the classroom, it does not necessarily become 21st century education. As long as education continues to be theoretical and a transfer of knowledge from the teacher or from the mod here, computer, to the student, it remains business as usual, which I refer to as schools of yesterday with teachers of the past using medieval methods of teaching and learning. I will illustrate this with two pictures that I have here, which are examples of university campuses. When I visit a university campus, I usually look at where pedestrians walk. If you look at the picture on the left, this is where the pedestrians are supposed to be walking. That's where the engineers put the footpaths. But pedestrians walk here. They want to walk here. The authorities have even put a barrier so that pedestrians do not walk here. But pedestrians continue to walk there because that's where they want to walk. If I can use the picture on the right-hand side now, this is the design, the walkway that was provided. And this is the reality, the user experience. So what we see here is that there is a disconnect between the design and the user experience. ESD rejects this way of thinking. Let us see what happens when pedestrians choose where they would like to walk. In this case, pedestrians are allowed to walk first, and when they have walked first, then the engineers will pave where the pedestrians have been walking, and this is the result. The lines are not necessarily straight. It may not look as neat as it should on the drawing board, but this is where pedestrians want to walk, and the problem is solved. Here is another example. Pedestrians are allowed to walk first, and when they have walked first, then they pave. No one walks in the grass anymore. So I can argue that ESD is learning for change. ESD is learning for transformation. ESD is learning-centered. When we use these methods here in the lecture rooms and in the classroom, we are bound to get a different outcome. This is what I refer to as critical thinking. The result is critical thinking, which is a combination of creativity and critical thinking, which results in the co-creation of knowledge, collaboration, and participation. ESD will enable quality education in the following ways, beginning with equity. ESD will enable access to education, retention of what is learned, and achievement of individuals to develop their full potential. ESD is contextual, ESD is relevant, it is based on the real needs of a community, a society, and a country. ESD is learning-centered, where competent teachers use active learning pedagogies. ESD is empowering learners to take informed decisions and responsible actions for environmental integrity, economic viability, and a just society. ESD is learning to live together, addressing freedom from discrimination and equal opportunities for self, families, and communities. ESD supports robust systems, that is, good governance and equitable resource allocation to support quality education. If ESD enables these characteristics, then I can argue that ESD is quality education. If ESD enables these characteristics, then our chances of fulfilling goal number 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals are much higher. I will leave you with a discussion question. In what ways are we preparing our students with competencies, skills that meet the local and global challenges of the 21st century and beyond? I thank you.